We never expected to find the rare Arcadia Super Select System, an Amiga-based arcade driven by publisher Mastertronic. So when one showed up in Canada, we jumped at the chance to buy it and ship it over, as you saw in part 1 of this series. Today we try to fire it up.
I rub some legs.
I hold my head in my hands.
We find someone who actually worked on the system.
Never, I've just thought, it's like this never existed. It was like...
And Holly turns up with a missing piece of the puzzle. So let's get it in the workshop to show you. We are the Retro Collective, and this is Trash to Treasure. Yes, we're here in the workshop because it is time to test the Arcadia Super Select System. I'm joined by Richard from Heba. Thank you, Richard.
Hello, Neil. Hello, everyone.
And in addition to what we've just said in the intro, really exciting because this is news that we've just got in. A chap by the name of Hoffman, who you may have heard of, hacker, musician, Amiga extraordinaire, has been working to bring us the first new game for the Arcadia Super Select System in 34 years. So more on that a bit later, but I just had to share it with you now because it's so exciting. So let's start on the workbench and see what condition this is in. This is something that's going to involve a bit of sleuthing and a bit of stupidity on my part. Let's take a look. It's a chunky unit, this, and we first looked at it in part 1, but just to give you a quick recap, it comprises of a Commodore Amiga 500 system board, a breakout board to connect it to the arcade monitor, controls, coin mech, etc., and feed power to the system. Have I missed anything there? That's what the breakout board does.
Yep, controls, audio.
Yep, all those bits. We were missing a couple of spade connectors on those cables, which we'll need to rectify at some point. And the Arcadia 10-game board, into which the games, or mega boards they're called, slot into.
Okay.
The expansion board has its own 5-volt power input over here, so it needs more than the Amiga can provide just through its side expansion port alone. We started by testing just the Amiga board all on its own, didn't we, Richard? Just to sort of break it down and make sure we weren't overcomplicating things.
We did, yes. Yeah, we got the Amiga board out, tried to test that.
Now this system came from the US, remember, or it came from Canada via the US, so it was designed to be used in arcades with 60 Hertz monitors. That's universal in arcades, isn't it, over here? It'll all be 60 Hertz over here. It is a very early revision 3 NTSC Amiga 500 board we found. The Kickstart ROM is version 1.2. The date code, if I'm reading this right, Richard, is the 19th week of 1987.
That's right, yeah.
And that's the same year that the 500 was released. And it's, I don't know about you, it's certainly the earliest 500 I've ever seen.
I've never seen one like that, especially with all those little patch wires and things on. So that's really, really early, really early.
And from what we can tell, those patch wires have nothing to do with the Arcadia. That's just an early revision Amiga.
Yeah, they got us a little confused when we were doing the testing. So yeah, we'll go into that a little bit. But as far as we can tell, that's actually stock from the Amiga. Yeah.
Looking around the board, we didn't see any visibly leaking capacitors. There was a little bit of surface rust or corrosion forming on some of the chips, just on the legs, and that was understandable because I believe this came from a destroyed cabinet that was perhaps left outside for a period. So in my opinion, it's amazing it's not in worse condition. No,
it's pretty good. Some of those boards were very, very clean, and yeah, there was just a little bit of corrosion on some of the sockets, as you'd expect, and that's that sort of era of board, yeah.
And you wanted to make sure that that corrosion and that crust hadn't found its way too far into the sockets, because that might cause some issues. So we popped them out, starting with that early Agnes chip. This Agnes chip is an NTSC only one. Later ones, you can switch between PAL and NTSC. So first time, again, that I've seen an Agnes chip that early from an Amiga. And when it comes to cleaning these, your favoured first port of call is to rub the legs.
Yeah, definitely.
Tell us about this.
It's always good. So you've got to be quite gentle with most components, and you don't want to start putting on sandpaper and things like that. And the best thing we found to use is just normal office paper and just rub the legs with that. You get all the corrosion off, you get some of the tarnishing, and it really just polishes them up. There's enough abrasion on the office paper just to get all that up and clean. So you can use a little bit of IPA as well, just to lubricate the legs while you're rubbing away.
Just stop there. We also cleaned all the sockets with IPA. I took a fiberglass pencil to the 555 timer chip over there. and a couple of others just to clean them up. And then we were ready for power on. And this is where the stupidity kicks in on my part, I must add. It's important, isn't it, Richard, not to introduce new unknowns into an already unknown situation when you're testing things.
Absolutely, yeah. You should have a known working setup to start with before you start.
Yes, we
testing.
absolutely should, yes. We powered the board on to test it, and we found that there was no video output from the RGB port on the Amiga 500 board. At most, we got a brief white flicker when we turned it on, and then nothing. We could see from the PSU here, this is a modern PSU with a nice little reading on that the Amiga was drawing power. It looked absolutely fine from that respect, but there was no sign of life on the screen, was there?
No, and there was also no LEDs, because there's no LEDs on a Amiga 500 board because the keyboard isn't connected. So we couldn't even tell that there was any power really running on the board other than from the power supply. Yeah.
That irked you a little bit, didn't it?
It did,
you like
yeah.
an LED on
I
the
like
board.
an LED. I think you need to have a power LED on everything. So yeah.
Now, why were we not getting anything on the screen? It's because I grabbed the first Amiga to SCART cable that I found in my storeroom and plugged it in. Now, it wasn't tested, and it turned out that after much head scratching that it was my stupid cable that was at fault. Nothing more, nothing less, just a janky old cable.
We did test the monitor, and we did test that with another SCART cable, so we knew that the monitor worked. We just assumed the Amiga 500 SCART cable would work, because it's just a standard SCART cable.
We tested it with another SCART cable and another device to check the monitor, so we were getting nothing out of this thing. So we figured out that it was the SCART cable, and a lesson learned, a valuable lesson learned that I'm sure I've learned before, but I've learned it again. Never introduce new unknowns to your unknown situation.
Absolutely, yeah. So we knew that this was a potentially a working system. We knew that when it left Canada, it was a working system. So we worked on the principle that this should power up, this should give some life, and it should give us some video output. And that's always a good starting point. I think whenever you've got a system like this, you don't want to start diving too deeply into getting the scope out, getting your, all your probes and trying to get down to finding out whether waveforms are running. Really, you should treat it as a working system and do all of the things that we did, cleaning all the parts, all the socketed parts, cleaning all the board, all the edge fingers that could tarnish before you do anything else. Because if you don't do that and something has shifted around in transit, you could just be chasing your tail. And I've seen that over the last 35 years. People jump to get an oscilloscope out, start probing things, and you'll just go round and round and round in circles. You see hilarious examples of this on YouTube where people have dived into systems, they're finding something really odd that they don't expect because they've got an example system and they're trying their one, and really it's just a loose socket, it's a loose chip, it's giving bad signals, it's causing you all sorts of problems. So do all that cleaning first before you start diving into all of the testing.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple, yeah.
So we then tried the composite out port instead of the RGB port. Now, it is by design on an Amiga 500 black and white out with the composite out, so we weren't expecting any colour, and it was absolutely fine. It booted straight up to the Kickstart 1.2 screen. We plugged a disk drive into it, and we were able to play your favourite game, Richard, Thundercats.
That was terrible. It's not how I remember it.
But you did have it back in the day.
I did have it,
Yeah. Was it part of the 10-star pack?
I think it was. That's why I played it.
Packs?
Yeah, that's why I played it so much, I think. Yeah.
Anyway, it's not about the game. It proved that our Amiga 500 system was working, and we could then try the next thing in our testing. So now it was time to test the Arcadia board itself. We carefully reunited the 500 with the expansion board, and then we powered it up. And while the whole thing does turn on, it didn't do what we would expect an arcade to do. We wouldn't expect an arcade to show the Kickstart screen, would we?
No, definitely not.
And we can see from the board, the Arcadia board, that it's got its own ROM set, so it should be going into some kind of menu when it turns on, and it wasn't doing that. So something wasn't right here, and we took it apart again for a closer look. Now, the first thing we saw was the connector. There was a small split evident at one end, wasn't there?
Yes, that has obviously had a little bit too much pressure when it's been screwed down over the years and caused a crack, which did get worse.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute. And the danger of that is that we could get misalignment of the legs when we put it together. The board has its own set of ROMs on there, as I mentioned earlier, and various other socketed chips. So Richard gave all of those a quick clean, just as he did on the Amiga board. We've got ROM set 2.11, And there are 2 later dumped ROMs for Arcadia that I can find, culminating in 4.0.
Wow, okay.
What advantages they offer, I don't know, but I'm happy to keep this as it came at 2.11. The next issue we spotted while cleaning these was you popped out one of the ROMs and you noticed a leg was bent. Now, this wasn't us popping it out and bending the leg accidentally, was it?
No, it was curved around, so it might have been making a very poor contact, but it was certainly bent, a long time ago when the system was put in. I guess. Yeah.
And Inspector Tech, who sold us this board, he did mention when he was trying to get it going first time round. He said there's some chip creep. I've had to put some pressure on some chips to get it going. So it could be that he just managed to get some contact with that again. It got working, and he said, "Great, it's working," and shipped it over.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
You can see us testing now with a known good Amiga RGB cable and monitor, so we're in colour now. But our problem does persist. We're still only getting the kickstart screen when we turn it on. Now, this was proving to be more of a headache than I'd anticipated, so thank goodness Richard was here to help. Richard, you checked a few things. You checked from the 5-volt power input on the Arcadia board with the multimeter. What are you checking here?
Yeah, really just checking that we haven't got any really sort of not dead shorts, but really low resistance, because that could indicate you've got some faulty components. We were suspecting we could have a damaged board for whatever reason. Even though we knew this was a working system, because we had the Amiga board up and running, we started to suspect something had gone wrong on that daughter board. We also suspected possibly the connector for the power may have been inserted the wrong way around. So that was another thing we were looking at. And just the testing we were doing on the power supply just indicated there was something a little bit amiss of something connected across that 5-volt rail. So we decided to take the whole unit apart.
We did. And you checked a few things. You spotted some of those little orange tantalum capacitors.
Yeah, they're normally ones to watch out for because they do tend to go short circuit and they spectacularly explode. So we haven't had any explosions yet, but they could have started to degrade. Yeah.
Sure. And then we took a closer look at our cracked connector and it completely broke. So longer term, we will need to replace that connector. So that's what we were faced with at this point, trying to get to the bottom of this. Richard, you took the board away to look at it in your Heber lab at this point. I think you checked the TANTs and you found one bad capacitor, did you?
Yes, the tantalums are all fine. Nothing wrong with those at all. Measure those all out. But there was actually one electrolytic capacitor that had gone really bad. So swapped out both of those. Only 2 on the board. So swapped both of those 2 out. And that did improve our potentially low resistance that we had on the board. So that put that back up. It looked a lot more sensible at that point.
Right.
That wouldn't have caused any of the problems we were seeing, but it certainly would have started to deteriorate more and possibly cause some problems later on. So again, good that we caught it.
So that was a good spot. But when we put it back together again, we still had exactly the same symptoms. So we were really scratching our heads. And then at this point, we started to ask the question, why is this trace here cut? Was it to solve an issue with an early board? Was it to disable some kind of feature? And what are those lines for? So Richard checked the schematics on this cut line. What were they?
They were the 2 data lines. So they were data lines 5 and 6, which immediately jumps out at you because if you don't have data lines 5 and 6 on a 16 data line bus, you are missing some data.
Right, yeah, so there's no good reason for these to have been cut.
No.
We might have expected it on the 500 board itself to try and disable some kind of functionality on the Amiga, maybe skip checking for a disk drive or a keyboard at boot up and then kick in the Arcadia, but that was all stock. So this was just completely bizarre. So I put on my sleuthing hat and let's go back to the first episode of this series when I first unboxed this. And I was just trying to check my sanity at this point. And if we zoom in here, sure enough, the traces are cut when it comes out of the box. Now this proved that this wasn't any damage that we've accidentally done. It hasn't been me being ham-fisted with a screwdriver, accidentally jabbing it in there. It was there the minute it came out of the box. Now here's an image from Inspector Tech's video, who sold me the unit. He shoots in 1080p, so it gets a bit blurry as we zoom in here. But even so, we can see at this point, there are no cuts to that exact spot. So this proved that those traces have got damaged somewhere along the way. So how has this happened? Well, when it arrived, you can see here the wiring loom was wrapped up and pushed into the unit just to stop it from flapping about in shipping. The end of those wires are exposed, so some of those spade connectors might have been just hanging out, making contact with the PCB. And ordinarily, we wouldn't consider this to be a huge risk.
No.
But there's something odd about this PCB you've noticed, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting board. So we know that this is a Rev B board, so they must have had at least a Rev A, so this is probably the second version. But the board itself is very soft. It's FR4, which is a fiberglass board, but there isn't a nice shiny coating on it. It's very matte, and the underside of the board is incredibly clean and incredibly matte. We noticed that when we took it apart. But yeah, the more you start looking at the board, the more you realise it's just a really, really soft surface.
Right. So it was entirely plausible that those spade connectors at some point either jabbed into the board or were just gently rubbing against the board in transit, and it's cut the connector, cut the traces in quite a straight line, which really did have us scratching our heads. So, Richard, you decided to patch them up. And you spotted one more when you were doing that, didn't you?
Yeah, we patched up those two because they are the data lines. We needed those running. We actually tested it after that and ended up with a Guru meditation error.
Yeah.
So that was red. Good sign, because then it's trying to boot, it's trying to do something. And at that point I noticed there was yet another, and it was actually one of the address lines. So that would make, again, complete sense. It can't address properly, can't get the data in. So after patching that up...
Success. This time it boots into the Arcadia BIOS screen with no games detected because they aren't in at the moment. But this was huge progress, so a massive thanks to Richard for figuring that one out. Let's put all 5 games in now and see how they fare next. And sure enough, each of them pops up here and shows as initialized OK, and the Arcadia Super Select System comes to life with a menu. There's an icon for each game so you can select what you want to play. And if I don't touch the system at this point, it cycles through the games to give a little preview of each one, each programmed with an attract screen. These aren't just stock Amiga games, these are specifically programmed for this system. And then in between that, you also get these cool looking Super Select system screens. Well, I think they're cool anyway. There's a variety of them. There's like a robot, a Terminator, there's a lady playing pool. I quite like the logo. And
I think they're great, yeah. There's a really nice menu, yeah.
And while we're on the subject of games, I had the opportunity to speak to Nick Speakman. Now, Nick was actually working on the system back in the day. Yes, we actually found someone who worked on this rare system. So instead of me critiquing each and every game that came out for it, here's lots of footage of the various games so you can get a flavour of it, while we hear Nick's memories and thoughts on the system over the top of them.
Hi, I'm Nick Speakman. I worked for Binary Design from 1987 until 1990. So the thing you got to bear in mind is that this was at a period where there wasn't so much of a thing as a regular Amiga game. At that point, we kind of had an Amiga 1000. The 500 was like almost an imaginary beast at that point because it was still being talked about but not released. Nobody had those, and so it was very early. We'd all sort of crown rare in the 2 Amiga 1000s we had and do development on that. So normally, if we did arcade conversions, that's really simple because obviously you've got something to copy. And if you're doing something that's original, then you've obviously got your own ideas in your head to go back to sort of, the Pickfords doing Feud or Zub, like their own babies, their own creation. Whereas this was really weird because the thing we rode was we just kept getting sent different versions of the game, like completely different. You'd work on it for however many weeks, and then suddenly, bang, all the graphics had changed. It was like, what's going on? So it was unlike any other game. The first version we saw, it got some sort of composite CCTV camera type thing and scanned in models of these sort of balls and a created surface and whatever. And the created surface animated and came towards you, and these models were really they were photorealistic because they were photographed. And everybody just went, wow, the game is rubbish. It plays really badly, but the graphics are amazing. And then apparently, it got really bad feedback because it wasn't a particularly great game. And all they did was take the graphics away, which was its USP. So they kind of destroyed it. So by the time it came out on the Amiga, they didn't even have the moon. They just had a sort of colour cycling, the sort of thing you see on an Atari 800, sort of cycling through some colours at the top of the screen. It was like and then hand drawn the balls, and it was just like, why have you taken its special thing and ruined it, sort of thing. So it smelt like the marketing people were all over it, because you would either be copying an arcade machine, in which case it's absolutely verbatim, try and make it as close as you can, or it's your own. But you never saw that where things changed so drastically during development. So that just smelt to me like, it had the hand of panicking marketing execs all over it, rather than somebody who understood the industry and the market itself. What we saw was the tip of that chaotic iceberg. I think it was weird. We were working on World Darts, which was a conversion of the 180 game that had been quite popular on Mastertronic's sort of budget release for 8-bits. But it was a really quite long, protracted, unusually protracted development period. In that period, you would typically have sort of 3 months tops for a game, and this just seemed to drag on and on and on. So that was a sign that things were not great. But I mean, the Flying Ravioli brothers, of course, were Steve and John Pickford, and that was the last thing they did before they went off to form Zippo and then Z2 and Wetrix and all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of their swan song, and I think they were quite embarrassed by it, to be honest, because it was a bit, when you compare it to the likes of Feud or Zub and things like that, it was kind of a bit mediocre. It was treated quite disparagingly. I mean, it was treated as sort of like, I don't want to say it was beneath us, because that makes it sound like we were elitist or something, but it was kind of, I think the developers saw it for the folly that it was. I think if it had been led by people who understood the difference between home and arcade, and more time and resources had been allowed to go into more original content. Xenon came out on it, and so there was good stuff appeared. It was possible to make it work. There was no appreciation of the ROMs were treated just as a storage device that could have been expanded upon. If you look at what the NES did in its latter years, when you had like sort of 512k cartridges, switching banks and stuff, the possibilities of that cartridge could have been quite amazing. But it just had to fit on a floppy disk, and that was. Its fate was tied to Mastertronic. So when I joined Binary Design, it was kind of the halcyon period, because at that point Mastertronic was filled about 6 or 7 of the top 10 games in any one week, and at least a couple of those would be Binary Design games. Arcadia affected Mastertronic, which then in turn had a massive effect on Binary, because really Mastertronic were the sort of, when I joined, they were probably accounted for like 80-90% of the development, and by the time it went bust, it was probably still hovering around sort of 40%. But that change in percentages was brought about by the sort of the demise of Virgin Mastertronic more than anything. So.
And thank you to Nick for sharing those memories. Now, we've got the guts of our system working, we've seen some of the games. What we need next is a cabinet to put them in. And we discussed that in part 1. We saw 5 different cabinets, as you can see on the screen here, that we could potentially use for this, starting with the monstrous American cabinet that this control panel came from, and this obviously came from originally. Now, there was little chance, I think, of us getting hold of one of those here in the UK.
No, that was going to be really tricky.
It would have cost a fortune if we did find one in the US to ship it over. We could have recreated one, but if other options come up, then it's nicer to try and use a period piece to put this in. So we kept looking, and well, the stars aligned, because a chap called David Rowland, he reached out to me and said he has an Electrocoin ElectroChoice Elite cabinet, which is this one here. Now, this is the very cabinet that was used in the UK for the Arcadia Super Select System, or at that point they'd renamed it to Electra Choice, and Electrocoin were distributing it.
Yeah.
And here comes Holly with a van and the very cabinet that David kindly has sold to us for a very fair price. It is, look at this, an Electrocoin Electra Choice Elite. And as we get it off the van here and inspect it, you can see right on the front of the control panel, it says Arcadia Systems Incorporated and Electrocoin. So this is an official cabinet.
So nice to have that, yeah.
I know some of the comments from part one said, you've got to put it back in an American cabinet. And as I said, we could have recreated that, but I think this is the next best thing, an authentic cabinet from the period that would have had this very system in here.
Yeah.
But it does need some TLC, doesn't it, Richard, this cabinet?
Yeah, it needs a little bit of restoration, but not too much.
We're told by David that the monitor is a little bit soft, so we'll get Holly working on that. She's our monitor, our CRT expert. There's a little bit of wobble in there, isn't there? You can see some of the dowel just through the gaps.
Yeah, we'll definitely need to make sure we clamp and put that back together. Some glue should sort that out. So, yeah.
But on the whole, it's not too bad. And we can see that it has actually been converted at some point to a 6-button system. So I'm guessing Street Fighter 2, as was the fashion when I was a young man. And usually as well, you can see the difference in the buttons between player 1 and player 2. Player 2's got slightly sloped buttons. And we thought, oh, this is just a bit of a bodge where someone's put Street Fighter 2 in it. But if you look at the US control panel here, it's exactly the same. So I guess it's designed for player 2 to be sort of at an angle around the corner at the bar. I don't know.
It is a little strange, isn't it? But yeah, I guess it's just to try and give you a bit more room. You can still see the screen. It's quite a decent sized screen. So yeah, it's an interesting choice.
It's a nice looking cabinet. And I don't think we're going to need to recreate any of the artwork or anything like that. We'll keep some patina on there, and I think it will make a lovely addition to the cave when it's up and running. And that's what's going to happen in part 3. We're going to give the cabinet the full service. We're going to fit the unit inside there, sort out the monitor, test it all out, and bring it all together to have a working Arcadia system. And as mentioned in the intro, we're going to make a new card, aren't we?
Yeah, because the games aren't wonderful, are they?
Yeah, you saw the games just earlier there. Xenon, that's pretty good.
Yeah, okay.
Sidewinder's okay.
Yeah.
If anything, I spent the most time when I was testing this playing leaderboard golf.
Yeah.
But I could have done that on my C64, on my Amstrad CPC. It doesn't scream 16-bit, let alone arcade.
No.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was good. We had some fun playing the darts game. I thought that was quite good.
Yeah, and of course we heard Nick Speakman, who we heard from earlier. It's his voice in the game that shouts 180 or player 1, player 2. So that was quite fun. But yeah, with Hoffman's help, there's a box just there actually. If you see the black box, Hoffman recently released a game for the Amiga called Seekonoid. Fantastic twin stick shooter, and he has been he did it in the space of about 3 days, didn't he?
It was amazing. Yeah, from a tiny bit of information that we gave him, he went off, found out the emulator, the security system that's used on it, and ended up getting his game running.
Reverse engineered it all so that we can make it work in it will be, because of the size of his game, using all 16 sockets in a mega card. And then we're going to burn those ROMs, flash those ROMs, and we're going to test that out. So not only will we have a fully working system, we'll have a brand new game for it, and a game that people might actually enjoy playing.
Have to go in slot 1, I think. Yeah.
So we're going to hear from Hoffman in part 3 as well, where he'll talk us through all of the challenges that he faced in doing that. So lots to do, lots of progress made today. Thank you, Richard, for your help with it today.
It's okay.
And we look forward to showing you more in part 3. As always, if you'd like to come and see this for yourself, people were trying this out on the workbench this weekend at our public events. Head to retrocollective.co.uk, where you can book a ticket to come and visit us. Check out Richard's shop, shop.heba.co.uk, for their awesome retro products. And if you want to support what we do, head to patreon.com/RMC Retro. See you next time, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.